Okay. Just to sum up, because Srinidhi and Tanisha were not there. So first half, what we did yesterday was we thought about stories and our objects through emotions. I mean, stories of our objects or of our archives through the emotional or the emotions. And I think when I concluded that session, I sort of remarked that why this was important is because our record sheets can also be revisualized as spaces for all kinds of stories to come up, right? So this is to say that, yes, one is metadata, which we know in traditional sense is in traditional sense is supposed to be what is the color, what is the medium, format, size, so on and so forth. But keywords, filters, search words can always be expanded to incorporate more emotions, more values, more subject areas, right? And that is very critical to sort of keep in mind while we are trying these personal and different kinds of archiving projects. So I really want to just quickly show from the oral history project because that tab was easier to find. Now, while we've done this for oral histories, you can imagine doing it even for archival objects. So you get into identifying different stories. You get into looking at different sub-aspects of the stories or what could be important. So, for example, the whole idea that there were private saloons, if somebody is researching about mobility, right? So while this is not, so what I'm trying to differentiate over here is, it's not necessarily, let's say, very critical from the point of view of a family archive history, and especially a family archive, which is usually going to be studied from the point of view of business studies and economic reforms and bureaucracy, administrative work. But that's the rigidity that one could break when you think of alternative ways of keyword mapping and record management. This can get very extensive. I'm not going to hide that. And that is why you do this exercise for a few objects and then identify what needs to be kept and what doesn't need to be kept. So you sort of set your own framework, right? In terms of, so Fuleku, for example, is first of all a regional or a Gujarati word, right? So whether we'll write this in English, we'll write this in Gujarati, whether it will be italicized. So these kind of conversations become very important when you think of your objects through stories and archives through stories, and not just as records and resources, the way we have until now discussed in the first 3 sessions, right? We said if there were photographs, you'll talk about medium and print material, and you'll talk about black and white versus color. If you were looking at drawings, you will talk about its sizes and scale and so on. So yes, that is also important, and so is this. And the storytelling is, in my understanding, something that sort of starts connecting different kinds of materials together. So when we put oral history project on Sept Archive's website, and when we put the drawings, the connecting factor is not really the other kind of metadata. It's the subject keywords, right? And subject keywords come from the stories that you want to tell about your objects. So just wanted to show this. I mean, we are still working on this. There's not too much of novelty. But yeah, I think what is important is, I think even just if you focus on this, right? So the way we identified the fields. Now, if you all remember, I had very briefly shown the Women Architects project, which is also an oral history archive. So over there, the subjects are not this, right? Because it's an architectural archive. So already the lens is playing its role. The curatorial approach is playing its role, knowing or unknowing. But and then of course we expanded this. It collapsed. All of that also happened. And it might still collapse, is our feeling. But you keep trying this. Somebody messaged. Choppy voice, so turning off video. Okay, yeah. Everybody else was able to hear clearly? Okay, right. So it's not my internet, because my internet could also be a problem. So this is what we did in the first session. And we somewhere also, yes, very important, we got into conversation about spaces of reading your archive. Spaces way Vikram approached it in the first session was slightly different. It was context building for the archives itself. And that very nicely sort of transitions into the session that Tana did, where space is your space. Are you doing it in an academic pursuit, as an academic pursuit? Are you working on a creative project with two other designers and two musicians? Because she was in Edinburgh yesterday until the end of this month, and she's been there for 6 months for a postdoctoral research. What she was trying to say is that the same material at Patni Archives, when she engaged with them before the project began, and more as a relationship or a collaboration to translate the works. From there, she engaged with them in a more guiding factor, because Tana and Avni were participants of CPA 2020. From there, she's become now the academic advisor, as well as one first internship was sort of initiated by her at Ahmedabad University. From there, she moves on to, one thing she didn't talk about is she also helped curate Patni Archives exhibition for Kitchen to Kacheri. So every time she's using a different role or a different space, and hence a different role, either ways, whichever comes first. And now when she's in a postdoctoral research in Edinburgh and meeting different kinds of scholars, sort of the same material is living different lives. Over here, I think what was important to highlight, which I didn't, that she's not necessarily building an archiving project. She's approaching it as a researcher and a scholar. And this is where, while you all are building your projects, you might have to identify at some point whether today, are you wearing the hat of a researcher? Tomorrow, you could be sitting and wearing a hat of a curator because you've got an invitation to put up the exhibition at Triveni Sangam in Delhi. And the third day, you might be approaching it as an archivist because you need to finish the recording and mapping so that the material is at least organized in one fashion for you to re-access it and for others to access it. Whenever you decide to make it public. So whenever I say others access, it's not a given that you have to make things public, but still, at least the moment you have organized it, it will mean that there will be interest to access it. So in the second conversation, Tana took us through her journey of working with Patni Archives material and what it means to do research investigations. And what was interesting, what she showed yesterday, was the same piece, which was from a report as an archival evidence, when it was used as a form of a podcast or referred to. But the podcast was more of an engaged space where they had got more participants to engage, talk about that story, that part of the relationship between certain Maharajas and their precious belongings, their stones, and how they got it and who was it passed on to. So that same story, when we read it as a written piece, what it did to you versus when you listen to the podcast, which is much more emotive, which is much more expressive, also inclusive of other voices. How does that sort of affect the reading of your of the same archival material? Now, why again this is important is to say, and why this sort of is about today's workshop, this weekend workshop, that you need not think about archive building processes also as a solo activity. Nijum has done this. I had shown some samples last time that when they were working at Brito Art Trust, they were all working together. And the moment they worked together, yes, it will feel like there's confusion, but that also opens up more conversation to make it holistic, inclusive. But again, then when she starts doing it herself, it gets too much work to do or too difficult. So that balance will have to be struck, of course, in terms of what is community participation for you? Where does it come in? How does it help the archive structure itself, expand itself, and be reinterpreted? Right? So all reinterpretations can also not become a part of the mapping sheet. That's also a line one has to draw. But that can also, there can always be a space on the website, let's say, to have more stories coming in. So where do you draw that line for yourself? I think this freezing your curatorial lens for the archive, the charter or the policy. I mean, I'm not asking you to make 10 pages of a document, but at least the goals of your archive, the methodology, people you are thinking about. Shwetal, this is really going to be the key exercise. Even if you do it online, before you move on to doing your record sheets and mapping. But these two exercises will also justify why we wait for at least 20-ish days for you all to come back and then try digital archiving. Because already from what I have understood and already in conversation with the facilitators, these questions will need to be answers will need to be much more crisp and clearer. Why are you building a digital archive? For whom? How are you structuring it? And hence, how are you building your record sheets, or how are you mapping the information? So this will be the plan in terms of what you all do with your sample materials before we meet again. So this is to summarize what's happened and where we are going before I move on. Thoughts, questions, comments? Doable, not doable?
This might be slightly random, okay, my question in the sense, because I'm just wading through a maze at this point. But sometimes what I think leads for me to freeze in terms of processing information is when we remove context sometimes. So when we're isolating a certain amount of data to work with it, you also have to do away with certain contextual information, because and then I'm not able to bring relevance to that content. I know that it's becoming very vague what I'm saying, but
yeah, in fact, I would say if you want to give us an example, it's okay. Your question I can still understand, and it's still relating to a lot of provenance conversations that we did last time, right?
Yeah.
So if you can give us a very specific example of a certain video clip or a photograph that you have in mind.
Okay, I'll just look for it. You can.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I think this is a good time for all of us to also talk through samples if there are any questions.
Yeah.
Because yesterday we haven't done that.
Now this works for me. I can think of the kind of texts or samples that are going to go into the archives, as we are saying, the kind of crowdsourced responses or the stories that are currently getting into it. And there will, of course, be different versions of the stories. That is the part that I'm really interested in, because right now, the textual sources, as you pointed out, in, I think, the last workshop I attended, that the textual sources first need to be archived and then go to the audience or then go to the participants and see how the stories are changing or how they are responding. So the good problem that I am looking forward to is getting the text, the let's say a Bengali mainstream printed version of a story, and then seeing what are the different iterations that are locally coming out and giving them as much space and validity, of course, and trying to see how these stories are sort of shifting or changing or pushing certain boundaries, or what are the shifts. It's like looking at the same image, but like, in a 3D panel, as it were. So depending on where you're standing, the distortions are different. So how to put that in archive, how to make it visible or accessible for eventually the consumer, the end user, that is one thing that I'm concerned about. Because again, the emphasis is not on saying that this is the one true version and the rest are all lies. The emphasis is on seeing that the story is in fact a very mobile thing, and it needs to be looked at that way. So yes.
Yeah, in fact, it will be very fascinating. I can already imagine a few structures once you have more of them. Simply put, I mean, right now, because you're still looking for them, so I don't want to confuse you, but simply put, what will happen in that case, each of your story, even if it's an edition of the same story, will be its own archival item, right? Now, whether you make sub-collections by the choice of a story or you choose another lens, that we will arrive at as we go further in it. But what I'm trying to say is, if this diary had 5 copies, in an inventory of a store, it will just say yellow diary, 5 copies. In your case, we won't be doing that. Because each diary might have a different kind of page structure, a page quality. You are getting into, just because of page quality, identifying them as separate entities. That itself, in the metadata, whatever smaller changes, very granular changes might come up, that, okay, this was printed by Rolly Books, and this was written by so-and-so trust in a temple, and this was said by so-and-so lady in a shop. The sources, or maybe there's another reason, the format, printed versus oral versus something else. These nuances will sort of already make the variation accessible. So I'm just addressing the 2 words that you used. Accessibility, the record sheet will take care of. This is why we do record sheets. But the visibility is where your curatorial efforts will come into play. How are you projecting the archive, whether you are doing a publication, whether you're doing a website, whether you are just creating a searchable database. But what is the face that you are creating? Are you making sub-stories collections? Are you making stories connect to stories? Are you just putting them inside an exhibition room where the same story is being said in 5 ways? Anything is possible, right? In terms of creative dissemination. And that is where the visibility will come into play. So even if you do it in a physical space, we will discuss how we can translate that into a digital one so that it has longevity. Or if you were first doing it in a digital space but you want to try it in a physical space, one could explore those options also. But the accessibility and visibility will be addressed by 2 different hats. Accessibility by you being a researcher, and visibility by you being the curator of the archive or the project.
Yes.
And I'm just using these roles and hats not as categories, just as a way of talking to understand.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yes.
Great. Shweta?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just pulled out one. So since yesterday, I've been thinking of how I can restrict it to a certain zone that I'm working on, even within Baroda. Even a mental space that we are talking about, which I could be putting down. So, I mean, this is a poster which is from Fine Arts faculty, and I have similar notices and posters put up at different venues, and the kind of things that I think it tells a lot about the space, but unless you compare it to the outside, it doesn't make sense on its own. Am I making sense over here?
No, you are making sense of it. So what you will have to, the way you'll have to think is a little differently. So while, and also I know, for example, right now, even I can imagine the space around it, which many of them might not, who have not seen the Bank, Baroda or Ahmedabad. We'll have to, for a moment, not think about you just in experiencing it there. Or rather to say you are experiencing it there, and now let's say your effort with the archiving project is to recreate that experience, both again as an archivist or as a curator. So
as a curator, I can understand.
Ishita.
As a curator, I can understand. When
as
it
an
comes
archivist,
there.
So what will happen?
We have to attempt and then.
Exactly. I was just going to use the same word that you'll have to try it out. That when you make the record sheets, what doesn't get left out? For example, again, as I said, the basics we know, right? You will write white paper, black print. It's a notice. So what type of an archive it is, so on and so forth. First of all, you will have to say it's a photograph of a print, whatever. So all that will be done. What are the other things which need to be mentioned? So I think this had come up last time also when you were talking that in your case, the location of the archive and location of the content might be 2 different categories.
Yes.
So you might be getting into the nitty-gritties of whether an archive is found on a lamppost, whether an archival material is found in the Garba grounds, far away in the city somewhere, but connects to the project. So you might get into those. You might also get into who it is meant for. So this kind of a notice, for example. So who is it meant for? So this is why right now what I showed with the oral history project or even the women architects project, you are deciding your keywords now, which need not be there in any other archiving project before. You might be completely reinventing. Because nobody might have done, I've been looking, but I can't find anybody who's right now done an archiving project on festivals. So this is where it's coming from, right? So there are two things that you can keep in mind. One is the category festivals.
Yeah.
Right? Because that gives you a lot of subject keywords by itself. And then second would be the specificity of this festival. Because all festivals might not necessarily have music, might not have venue specificity, so on and so forth. But yes, you are getting into, so I would want to know where was this put up? Who was it put up by? So is it an artwork or is it an administrative decision? Right? Was it put up only around the venue? Was it put up across the city? Right? So yes, I already want to know these things, which you would also want to tell with this archive.
Right.
And only then somebody should use it in, let's say tomorrow, if they're writing a research paper on notices or the whole idea of ephemeral with festivals, then they will also use this material knowing all that context. Or body shaming and festivals, maybe. I don't know if any such is happening.
Yeah.
So,
politics.
But don't think so much about what all researchers might do, because I don't mean to do that to you. The possibility of this getting used is enormous. So you won't be able to map that. The experience that you have lived and which you want to recreate, only that much needs to be achieved in the Excel sheet. And this is where these are becoming personal archiving projects, right? So the personal here for me also is getting more and more clearer. Where if you had put this inside an institution, they would refrain from mostly getting into so much of, they might have still gotten into maybe where it is put up, who was it put up by, and maybe a bit of it, but not necessarily more that you might know. Because they can't do this then for the next set of festival collections, which might come from Nijum. Because they know Shwetal has all this information. If Nijum will not have it, then that set of record sheets will look 000, empty. So they have to think of frameworks which have to work across 5 festivals. Here, as personal archivists, we have the advantage of creating more specific archiving sheets. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. So I can get into details as far as I want to for a specific set of information also, even if I don't have to justify that information or give the leads over there. I can mention it over there. I mean,
yes, definitely. And in fact, within your own project, the struggle that you will face, which I'm already telling you, but we'll all attempt it any which ways, because this will be true for most of us. Especially Srinidhi's collection also has a very wide variety of collections. There are photographs also. There are videos also. Let's say there's papers also. There is drawings also, books also. So now, if you're getting into object-wise archiving or object-wise making the archiving sheets, do you want them to be similar, or do you want to work with 5 different frameworks? So what I mean to also say is, are you seeing all your photographs as photographs? Or do you want to get into photographs of dance versus photographs of static objects? So photographs of movement versus photographs of static. Are you getting into those subcategories? So now I'm obviously repeating all that we have done until now. This is where the tree structure is going to be very important. That, okay, you are seeing smaller capsules, or Srinidhi is right now going from one cupboard to another. So he's not getting into, but inside the cupboard, so let's say there is still materials of 5 kinds. So am I making subcategories and then designing the sheet to work for it? Which is how you'll have to start. The answer is right there. And it will start with what kind of a sheet will this need and what kind of a sheet will a pen need. But then you will try and collapse so that your work is lesser, more than work is lesser. The readability of the archive is not complex, right? Any directory works, or any catalog works most efficiently if I don't have to change my way of looking at the directory every 5 times. So we'll start with doing it for 5 different ways and then collapse it. And it won't be so different because it's still the archive of the same family or the archive of the same event. It might just be 1 or 2 columns different. We either reword them or we incorporate both the different columns. And wherever it is not applicable, you write not applicable. Okay, so this is a good time to do that exercise, which I was suggesting on the call yesterday, because that was sort of the plan for the whole day to end into that exercise. But because our conversations were so reflective and we all needed that time to tell our stories, we didn't worry about the exercise, and we should still do it once. And then I will take over and take you all through the exhibition project and the other side of community engagement, right? So before that, we close this side of the conversation. So if you all can take one archival object, right? Any one archival object that of your project, mostly it should be with you. Sony, you can even take that one of the books which you have with you. So I think all of us have at least one. And in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, we'll keep it 15. Write a short story about your object. I'm only going to leave it with that. Now, what kind of a story you write is really up to you, right? So this about is going to be interpreted differently by each one of us. But so your word limit is 150 to 200 words, not more than that. And you write it on Google Doc or something. So while you are reading, you'll also share on the screen for all of us to see how you chose to write about it. So even the structuring, even the choice of words or punctuations, all of this will help us in seeing how we are writing a story about our own object from the archive. The intention is, how are you choosing to tell the story of your object? We'll just give it 15 minutes, share that with each other. At that point, I might be able to make observations. We all might be able to make some important observations, which will directly reflect into the metadata or the mapping sheets or the way you are curating your archive. Right, so whoever wants to share, start. Hello, Geeta ji. Great. Okay, so Shwetal, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I went with the same picture, and this is what I wrote. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've written, this poster was probably put up before the whole gender debate came to center. I just went on with whatever first thoughts I got while seeing this picture. So today we won't be referring to women as women, but rather as humans with uterus. And we have started policing all bodies, not just women's. The documenting process started in 2015. So this poster could be put up in 2016. Who was policing women's bodies then? Was it not done before that? The researcher has been a part of this space during the 1990s. No such posters were seen then. Were women more submissive then, or was policing not a thing then, or was the approach to policing less problematic? This poster was seen during the celebration of Navratri at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda, Vadodara. Vadodara was considered one of the safest cities for women during a survey in 2017. I could be wrong about this date, but I just put this date because it was sometime then. Faculty of Fine Arts has been a melting pot for culture from all over the country, and in turn has contributed to the culture of the city of Baroda. Men and women dress up in their most beautiful attires while participating during this festival, attires that are mostly inspired or procured from rural India. Is this what was required of us?
I don't think there was a very set requirement. What we wanted to see is how each one of us is approaching it. So at least the way I would break down yours, you obviously first put the questions which are there in your mind, why this was important.
Yeah.
Right? So you justified the presence of this archive in your archival project.
Right.
And then you gave the answer for it. Right? Now, whether you choose to use all these different aspects in your archiving sheet is a choice you will make.
Okay.
And we will discuss, of course.
Okay.
Right? The other, to give you a sense, the other a stark option or stark contrasting option would have been to say, this is a white poster, stick you with glue, put up on a lamppost on 14th Street, right? So that would be the basic metadata, and this is the other way that you could have written about the story, right? The other important observation to make is you're still not evoking emotions directly.
Okay.
Your way of writing is not choosing to do that. We might find stories in the group which might want to highlight the emotional aspect more. So which means if it was something, let's say Aparna was talking about something that's been handed over to her and constantly reminds her of her grandmother's last birthday or something like that. So for her, the story would have been about her birthday and celebrations, because it's creating a certain sense of nostalgia. Whereas the actual object could have been a ring, right? But because that ring got handed down to her during the birthday, so now that additional story is what we are looking for.
Okay.
Which, if this collection was handed over to a traditional archivist, or sorry, a non-informed archivist, is not going to know and is not going to put it in the archiving sheets.
Okay. So this, what I did was the story of it, and the archiving information is a completely different thing that I would be putting, right? So I treated it as the curatorial story that would be around this, but it should also carry the metadata in it, you're saying, or not necessary?
So this exercise we anyways don't need to repeat right now until we come to the outcome. But yes, if you're thinking through stories, take your stories, I mean, even if they're just words that you're mapping, let them become part of the column, and then the traditional or the conventional metadata also continues to come.
Okay.
That's how it will be.
Sure.
What time do you have to leave, Shweta?
Actually, I should have left at 11:30, but I'll go and I'll listen to maybe one more and then I'll around.
Okay, sure. That's what I meant to say, actually, that if you were to listen to one more.
I'll just listen to
Nijum
one
or
more.
Kaustubh, whoever wants to go first.
Oh.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just sharing the screen.
Okay.
So this is a dish. So I just, jotting down the narratives around this dish. So should I read the text or like?
Read it, read it. I mean, listening in your voice is always beautiful.
Yeah, okay. So finally, I have washed it yesterday night after having pasta on it. More I use it, wash it, it revolves with more and more glaze. What is that dish? Let me tell you. Since I have thought before joining CPA, it's my mother's dish actually. But gradually started nagging my mother, and obviously she opened the Thakuma Jhuli, like it's a grandma's bag of tales like that. There is a Bengali storybook. So how it has came to Boichigram, so where I am now. So it actually the path is like Khulna, Bangladesh to Jashidi, Deoghar in Bihar, and then Chinchura was and Boichigram at last. So now it's the collection of it's with her. So it's like in West Bengal at least. So this is the kind of path I can just map through her stories. And the dish was actually of her mother's maternal grandmother's. Wow. So oral story says it is almost 200 years old. How this dish had been used to feed her grandmother, grandfather, when he used to go to there as Jamai, son-in-law of her great grandmother's home in Bangladesh. So that is why the flower image disappeared. So it's like I'm just trying to mocking it, like it has been used so many times. So there is a kind of small motif there was, but it's not prominent now. So you can see, so these are the kind of things. So and disappeared, get into the stories of many Jamais and who died, how and where, etc. So one dish can navigate, bring multiple stories of a family. So nothing to do with it, just navigating the maternal, familial, social, historical narratives to objects, trying to archive it as under the umbrella of a family climate. Most of the maternal objects traveled from that time Bangladesh uh, to West Bengal. See, now it's a foreign material for me. So yeah.
Very interesting. Very nice. Okay, Nijam, no problem. We can do exercises at comfort. So yes, Kaustuv, coming to the way you looked at it, I think you've incorporated both, right? So you have incorporated the basic information, technical information in terms of how old it is, what is it made of. When you say it is glazing, so you're obviously referring to the fact that it's porcelain. You could have, if you had more time, you would have also written the size, I'm very sure. But you also made us think, so you also did that. You also wrote about the story which you know by traveling across places. And then you talked about stories which could be discovered, right? So you did 3 kinds of mapping by writing this story. Now, when you translate this into your Excel sheet or record sheet, when you try and translate it into your record sheet, the question is, do you need all of it for this object, but also for all other objects, right? Or at what point do you see in the columns, I'm now talking literally through grids of the Excel sheet. At what point do you see yourself becoming that artist who is writing a poetry or a poetic say? And you might say, okay, no, this is not required. Maybe this is very, very much a personal art, which I am sort of making a part of the archiving sheet, which could be done. So I'm not saying not to do it. It's a choice that you will make in terms of what is the intent of your archive. So I know there are not enough personal archiving projects, and hopefully more and more will come, but there are personal archiving projects where the archivist has decided that the whole archive is seen through their lens. So you could choose to write completely through your artistic interpretation as well. Or you could say, no, at some point I want to leave it objectively, and then there will always be a page 2 to the archiving sheet where my voice will come in. So the more you do this for different objects in your archive, I think we'll get to know better. But I think you need to do this. It's beautiful, very engaging. What kind of stories will emerge? What stories are there? And what is the basic information about that object?
I have already started cataloging and taking photographs of those objects. Like yesterday, I have shown one
Yes.
almari and that flower vase and that small scissor and sari border. So and entire saris. So somehow I've started, but now I am just cataloging the objects which actually mobilized from through the maternal connection. My mother, her mother, her mother, her mother. It's like that. I'm just doing in that sense. So making works as output and planning for an exhibition or something like that. It's not like exhibition would be with only archival materials I have. It could be the derivatives of that archives somehow. Derivatives would be my works, my writings, and etc. etc. So yeah, with that photographs of archives and derivatives, how it could be. Yeah.
So what I'm clarifying for you over here, or a distinction that I want you to make, is, so when we think about the outcome of this workshop or the series that we have done, you could choose to do the artistic derivatives of the archiving project or the archiving material. But as a sub-step, I am suggesting that you also make a database of your archival material. So you remember the catalog sheets that we saw last time, right? For anyone to even discuss or understand the process of your derivation and hence the kind of artistic exhibition that you might put up, to understand that process, would you want to also archive the items of the process? So if you have got the vase, I think you also had a scissor, you also have a plate, you have the katha work, You might have found the trunk in which all of this was kept. So all of this, when you're documenting it, is becoming a part of an Excel sheet where you might start describing them in more categorical ways. That, okay, I'm describing its size, its time period, its material, its owner, and then story 1, story 2, story 3. So you are actually breaking down the process using Excel sheet or such a format, which is a grid format, so that your entire collection can also be seen as a catalog in itself, and not just the derivative of your in the form of your artwork. Now, whether you decide to show both of them to the world or not, it's up to you. This is right now a requirement I am putting forth from the workshop point of view. It would be nice to see your complete collection as a catalog in itself before you do something with it. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Thank you for this. And so it would help me also, like, to think about, think further. So as I have already started after joining this workshop, for this only I also joined this workshop. So to how to collect and organize the materials, like archival materials. So it should be done fast. Yes, you are right. So I'm trying
so
to.
at least some organization to imagine, also to understand, for example, that are you purposefully looking at the family archive from a maternal point of view, or when I say purposefully, I mean to say, is it a conscious decision, or is it just inherently only through maternal history? So these kind of questions will come up when you start organizing and structuring it. That is gender important to the way you are looking at the archive, or I think in your case, migration is more important than even gender, at least the conversations that I'm able to recollect. So what are the different lenses through which you could? Okay, I think you're frozen. So you were able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, once you structure it, we also get to know which are the ways in which you are looking at the archives. You will also get to know. And then, of course, the artistic interpretation, I think you are more trained for. So that will automatically flow. Even what we saw yesterday was very, very inspiring, actually, that you were already able to use these workshops to keep building the artistic practice. But also, let's build the archival practice. That's what I'm suggesting. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm trying to do that, and we'll show you all it's been, and whether it is completed or not, no matter, but I'll share with you all. So how much I can develop and all.
There is no completion that we all need to worry about.
And it won't be completed.
Yes. Nobody needs to worry about completion. These projects are very living projects.
It will be like never ending, no? I can navigate, found more and more objects. So
exactly. Yes.
And also like actually I was saying that that it will add more and more objects. That's how I'm also started like making numbering and all, that it could be infinite, in some way, like in a way I can add more and more objects and numbers and the things like that. So yeah, as our previous workshop was about that, like how we can make accession number and etc. and details, etc. So yeah, it's helping. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Nijim, just to give you a sense, even if you did it with your own watch, you can read it out. It's okay.
Okay, so here is the photo. This is from the Mahbub Rahman's catalog. I write it here also. So I read it now. The information in the photo is 1988 art exhibition of flat victims at Hotel Sonarga, organized by Chhatro সংসদ, Institute of Fine Art, Dhaka University. Art exhibition for flat victims at Shilpakala Academy, Dhaka, Bangladesh, organized by Charushilpi সংসদ. So I can write more about Charushilpi সংসদ and Chhatro সংসদ, but I just redo my work. So now I will read my text. From October 2022, I worked on the physical materials in Victo Arts Trust and also found so many materials which are belongings to Lipi and Mahbub. I found this catalog data from Mahbubur Rahman's exhibition in 2000 an in 2000. An exhibition held in 98, the information is about. This was just before the year of 1989. During this army government, there was an unstable situation everywhere. Bangladesh got the biggest flood in 1988 and students were organized for an initiative. These activities led them to initiate Mongol Shubhajatra. My subject choice is perfect because I can find a lot of history in Bangladesh via them.
Very nice. Thanks, Nijum. I'm glad that you did it because I think this third variety was very important to put on screen and for everybody to know, right? So I think Shwetal would have also understood. So Kaustav, Shwetal, they looked at the story and the poetics of it, whereas where you started is also a possibility that you can just describe what it is for what. What is all the more interesting is you also put your personal context as to how do you know them and why you're trying to build this archive, right? So now you'll have to just break these two things in the text. So your personal context of why you want to do it is more of the content for the charter of your archive or the vision statement of your archive. And the other aspects where you've described the factual information about the clipping, that goes into your metadata mapping. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then, yes, you can elaborate on the other stories when you have more time. I know this was a very short time. We were just trying it out. But in other columns of your metadata mapping, you can actually spell out different aspects of the story, whichever are relevant.
Okay.
Sony?
This is my object.
Mm.
This is the object that you had very carefully preserved. I mean, as soon as you open it, it starts crumbling. So this is the object. And it's a pocket. I mean, I think it says for itself, Pocket Sindhi to English Dictionary. And it costs $4. Okay. Used to. Okay. The object that I have chosen is an old tattered dictionary, Sindhi to English Dictionary. This is a dictionary pocket-sized, but too bulky to fit into a pocket. I saw it in the book cupboard of this person who was giving away her late father's books to me. I kept thinking about why she's not giving this dictionary to me when she's ready to part with so many other books. I thought I must still ask. It felt odd to ask. I never asked for other books. Asking for this one felt as if I'm being greedy, getting so many items for free, but unwilling to let go of this tiny piece as a memory of her father. Perhaps she was keeping it as a small token. Perhaps she was feeling guilty that she was giving away other things and she could atone for it all by keeping this one. I asked her. She paused. Oh. Then she moved to clear other things, and when I was about to leave, she said, "You know what? Take it." I felt so happy. Since then, I have revisited that memory quite a lot of times. I felt drawn to it because it seemed to be a great utility item to me as a young researcher, translator. Perhaps that's also the reason why it mattered to her as well. And maybe that's why her father had it too. Here is a word in Sindhi. Now, how do I translate it into English? That's the question every Sindhi faces in Ulhasnagar. English-speaking classes flourish there because we think we need to know full English in order to succeed. This little dictionary symbolizes a way to access that full English.
Wow, fascinating. So you brought in the voice of the other person into the writer. And I couldn't help but think that if she was also writing or making the archive with you, so all those people who have actually given the materials to you in your project, it would really matter, right? That if they were with you in terms of writing, telling stories and metadata mapping, would it be different? Because here it's based on how you received the information and felt about it. And in that case, it would have been more in situ for them to say, oh, this is what I felt, or this is why I have it. Yeah. So could both the voices remain, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I hope I persist. So it can be actually 3 voices. Mine, the person who was giving it to me, and the larger context of the community.
Of course.
The same thing can That would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, very true. But very nice. It's written also so beautifully. I'm so glad that you all enjoyed doing this exercise.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Geeta ji,
like,
do you want to? Ha, Kaustav? Sorry.
Yeah. So it's very flowing writing, like, I mean, and also I got some hints like how I can collaborate with other family members, like
Yes.
what they can tell the stories and what they think about these objects, and I can just show them that this is the object. What do you think? This it's like that. It can be like multiple stories. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. So there are two ways, right? Now, because you're bringing this up yesterday, also this had crossed my mind, and then I forgot to share when you were talking about your mother being a collaborator. And in Sony's case, it will be the donors being collaborators. In Nijum's case, it will be Mehboob Bhai and Lipi being collaborators. Is always a possibility. And you all can think about it primarily in two ways. One, that you actually make them hands-on collaborators. So you make one draft of the sheet, show it to them. They can pitch in, change things, suggest changes and comments. So they are literally active co-archivists. The second option is to do interviews and oral histories, where you get to know things from them. You have the objects which have come from them. And now you are using archival practices to marry all this information. So which means their voice is included, but in a different form of archival object itself, which is oral histories, because that will become that can become a part of your database or your collection. You don't have to keep oral histories or interviews on the side. They can actually become a part, sub-collection of the archiving project. So these are primarily two ways. Of course, there are more ways to collaborate, but you all can think about more people, the more people you have in your project, what kind of roles that they can play in terms of helping you or adding to the information. So yes, Sony's note reminds us of that possibility.
Yeah, it could be like, I mean, more elaborate and as well as more specific. So yes, that's why I have taken a screenshot of that you are presenting Pattani archives. So how
okay.
Interviewer, interviewee, and the place, locations, and clip number. So I can just plan in my way, but yeah, it would help me. Yeah, thank you.
So you're right, it becomes inclusive. The better word rather than elaborate will be it becomes inclusive, but inclusivity should not become open-ended. So we have to still look for specificity. So we include and we still build in specificity by breaking the information down so that a researcher is again not lost in our database. Yeah.
Inclusive would be right word. Yeah.
Geeta ji, do you want to also tell us anything about any object, a story that comes to your mind?
Yes, very much.
Okay.
So thanks to you for having met you at the Pettier at Sandalwood. And it furthered my interest in how I should go about archiving to make it more understandable and relatable to people other than myself. So I am bringing out a book, like I told you, wherein it will have the perspectives of my husband's subordinates, then his peers, colleagues, and superiors. So I'm collecting all that, and I hope to bring out a book on his first anniversary. So the process is going on, and you gave me a suggestion to also collect archival photographs from the company, so that people will be able to relate. Then I thought, how will I end it? So it is only a compilation of collections from various people. Say maybe there may be 40 people or so. So people get a fairly good idea. But what is my contribution? See, I'm making it for my on behalf of my husband, that there should not only for people who know him, who will read it and treasure it, but also for youngsters who are now working and they want to know, because he is one of the pillars of Bosch. So I think maybe they would like to know as to how they should get along in their life, maybe certain characteristics which come out from all these dialogues that I will be receiving from all these various people, how they can use. So it should be a book that should be valued both by people who know him and people who don't know him. And I want to give it a personal touch by this small object. So I would like to say, can you see something in this?
So I can see the bottle. I don't think I can see
Something
what's
is inside. Something is inside.
Okay.
Can you see now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Can you see?
Clear enough. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's.
So I would like to write in the end saying that I'll put a picture of this. I am a small bottle containing a much smaller object within me. It looks like a stone, but it's not a stone. So this is the kidney stone, which my husband, because he had a genetic problem. So he had about 4 times the kidney stones forming in his kidney. So it is usually, if you do it once and take adequate precautions, so this will not form. But in his case, how much ever he tried by having precautions like taking lots of water, not eating tomatoes, and having that ballet donné, but it did not work because it would come with regularity. So it is, unfortunately, that was the genetic problem that he had. So this is a calcium concoction of a collection of calcium substances which forms into a stone. And it looks very harmless for us when we look at it. But actually inside the kidney, it can cause havoc, because once it gets stuck in the urethra, then the problem of the passing of urine, and it may lead to so many other problems like a bleeding, terrible pain. A person can't even get up, which my husband suffered towards the end. So usually when he has had it removed in 2016, 2015, and again 2018. So the operation was successful, but then they would put a small stent to widen the urethra, because this and the problem with him was he never could get those symptoms immediately. Usually certain things, they give a symptom, like you may have fever. He never had anything, because I think he's so calm and spiritually so inclined that everything went for a very spiritual way of dealing. So only at the last moment, when it was going to become very serious, would those symptoms come out, and then we had to rush to the hospital. So this is, I think, one of the things in 2021, which was taken in Malati Manipal hospital, which was, and I always make it a point to ask them, please give me what you have removed. So this is the culprit. Though it is very harmless, this is the culprit that ultimately took my husband's life. So what I would say is, if anybody has this kidney problem, so please, not only ensuring, you see that after the operation is done, in case if you have to go for an operation, check to see the kidney is not infected. It was because there was an urethra. At some point of time, it became infected. And again, no symptoms. So happily, it went on multiplying and multiplying and making it cozy. So much so, when I saw the culture, I was so surprised that it was full of pus cells, no urine at all. So that was the stage wherein, because we did not know how to go about, nor did the doctors could make out by physical examination and all that, we had to go at the last minute for an operation wherein he had some complications. Meanwhile, he had experimented with antibiotics, wherein his resistance immunity was reduced. So what I would suggest is, those who have had kidney operation, and if you have had a stent put in, after 10 days or so, please get your urine checked for the amount of pus cells in that, because that will give an indication as to how good your operation has gone and how good the kidney is functioning. So I just want to say, I look very harmless, but I can give a fatal strike if it is not taken care of properly. So something on these lines I want to end the book with.
So, I mean, interesting. Definitely the take that you have on both loss and the elements of loss. What is also interesting is, you started with something poetic, you ended with something poetic. In between, you kept it very, very scientific, right? Now, the question over here, I mean, one for the book, of course, the larger question for the book will be, how much detail is really required at the book level, right? So some sort of editing, but book is not my focus, so I will leave that for you to figure out. When it comes to the archive, in an archive, such a text the question will be, how should we put it? How much? So when we say we want to look at other subjects, right? So you are looking at family, personal loss, objects of loss. And from there, you are going into other subjects associated with that element. Is it becoming too far off to describe a scientific process? Or just mentioning about that process and the repercussions, will it be enough? And then obviously, you know, somebody can find out, because these days, so can they then look at other libraries or archives where they can find out more about what really happens in kidney stone, what is urethra, what are the repercussions of a stent. So do you not go into the medical archiving bit in that sense? Why I'm saying this, the reason for this is not to touch upon a subject which we might write wrongly about is also very important. So I think because you did this, I think this is something I've not said to anybody before. So I will also have to write it down in my email when I'm sending to everyone for the next set of exercise. When we say we want to look at other subjects and we want to expand the knowledge of the archive through the archive, we also got to be careful to not tap into subject areas which we might write incorrectly or less about or more about. So we leave it at that point where we need the researcher to be able to decide, okay, now I need to look at archive number 2, which could be a medical archive in your case. Let's say in Nijum's case, she doesn't go into the depth of the politics of certain movements. So she stops there. She knows this happened. This is how it affected Mehboob Bhai and Lipi. That's it. Now, what actually happened in that event? If I want to know, I go into newspaper archives of Dhaka of that year and then read up on it, or I contact few other, political archives or look at the state archives papers. So there is always a need to stop ourselves and allow the person to go so that our archive doesn't take on too much of responsibility to communicate for all subjects.
Yeah, you have a point. I think, like you said, I am trying to focus on him as a person from the family side, because whatever points we are getting is from the outsiders. So they see him only as a professional, but I am seeing him as a family member and how that loss has affected me. I think, like you said, no need of going too much of detail into the medical, because that is not my focus.
Not my focus. The genetic part of it was more interesting. That if something is running in the family, being watchful about it. So him getting this illness, how did it affect him? Of course. How does it affect you as a partner? Or how does it affect other family members? How does it affect the room that he was using? What kind of changes, let's say, were required in his food routine, in the bathroom, whatever. Even if you go into those kind of nitty-gritties, that is still something that's in your forte.
Sounds interesting.
Yes,
but
it might be important to ask. Yeah, important to ask why this is important to the archive also. That's I know where you were going. So do people really want to know? So yes, if it is about, so I'm just thinking aloud. From this project, you could actually think about an archiving project, which is about being a primary caregiver. Or what does it mean to have illness in the family? Now, this is a subject which very less written about, talked about, became a much bigger concern in the last 3 years. But I know that it has existed for years, where people have had aged parents or people have had partners who have genetic disorders. What does it mean to be living the life of a primary caregiver? So you might start with you yourself and your husband's history, but you might actually expand this by talking to more people who have actually been in this position, because I know of people who have been primary caregivers for 10, 15, 20 years. You can't just leave the person out. It's your family member. You can't move on with your life because you know that there is a dependency. And these are difficult emotions and spaces which are not really talked about. And how does it affect life? So how do you choose to then decide your plans to recreate? When do you go watch a movie? When do you take a break time? Do you even get a break time? So Piku movie is a very good example of trying to touch upon such a subject. but of course they didn't go into deeper depths of it. So this is how you would have to think about your husband's project or history also. One is the other side where your granddaughter benefiting or grandchildren benefiting from your archiving. But if you want to think about the larger society and the medical aspect of it, then perhaps it lies in the household and in your experience with it.
Okay, so I think now for this book immediately, because I hope to have it published by April 16th. So because of this paucity of time, I think I will collect all the information that I have received, and wherever I find that it strikes a chord to the personality of my husband, I may make 1 or 2 lines, as I mentioned
of course,
below.
yes,
Below.
That's right.
And then in the end, I thought I will make it as something that has affected me as a person. I will not go into this details of this medical, this thing, that thing, and all that. How I have gone through this, and just so that people will know, oh, this was the illness. Because simply by saying he died because of kidney problem, it is a very generic. People will not know what it is. So to cut it down to a little bit of a better understanding, so I say that it is this kidney stone, the stent. The whole culprit is a stent which collected the infection and passed it on to the kidney. So I will just make a mention of that in terms of, if at all, if it is scientific in that way, and then write my feelings about it and what he went through in brief for this project. Because it will be with his office and etc. So when I make another archival thing, at that time as a caregiver, maybe I will go a little bit into detail. So this, if I make it as a caregiver, how many pages do you think I could go into?
This book?
No, not this book from Bosch. That is different. Second book as a caregiver.
So I think second book, I mean, I think, I don't know if it needs to become a book. It can be another form also. I think first you can start collecting the materials. What all in the house or in the family sort of address the idea of a primary caregiver and the history of a primary caregiver. And once we see that collection, then we can discuss in terms of whether you want to make a book out of it, whether you want to make a video out of it or a blog. So I think there are more ways to think about it than only a book. So that the quantity is not something that you are held up by.
Okay. So I will just start collecting materials related to his not being okay in the last 1.5 years. And then what all problems that I faced it, and how it has also affected his extended, his family of his siblings. I'll bring that aspect also, because they are very close to him. So those aspects also I can bring in, collect the information, then see how to go about what to do and all.
Exactly.
That would be good. So this is a big project.
And I think again, it will take some time.
So sufficient for 2023 and 2024.
Yeah. And I think one last thing that I want to highlight again, but I think more now for the book, the current book, because I think I told you this at the exhibition also. Information like this, I know to you it is coming very naturally. And honestly, I can speak for myself also, because of too many elders and having to take care of them. The medical information somehow, and I was always interested in science, so I'm being very personal here. I am able to not get affected by it. But when you don't know your audience, so I'm right now, let's say, speaking for Sony, Nijum, or Kostov, or the readers of your book, it will be very important to give a trigger warning. Because I think just to say things like blood passes and urine gets stopped and this, it's not as easy for a lot of people to take it. And a lot of people have gone through experiences where it affects them very adversely. So even in right now's conversation, it would have been nice for you to tell them that, okay, I'm going to talk about something like this. If you don't want to listen, everybody should have a choice to step out of a conversation. And in a book, all the more. Because they're literally going to hold the book. Everybody's going to get the book because Bosch wants to give it to all their employees, for example. And if somebody has had a very bad incident about health, and these words can trigger a bad memory for them, you will not be giving them a choice. So it might be useful at the start itself, in the foreword of the book or something, to put it out there in very readable ways, in a separate paragraph or an ending, that towards the end of the book, my own repertoire about this experience. There is a repertoire about my experience, which might also include some medical details. The readers may choose their own discretion to read it or not. So I think medical conversations, assault conversations, abuse conversations, all this information right now, it's very unfair that it is floating around. I mean, it's not only on you, it's literally floating around because of the media that we are living in without any trigger warnings, which is not very good for people.
Okay. So point
just
made.
Be careful for the book. For the book, definitely.
Yeah. Point made. Anyway, I'll be coming and sitting with you before it goes this thing, because you showed me that Aparna's book was very nice. So it will come to you. And another one, what I thought was, can I include that voice, this thing with a QR code? There are some people who speak very well. So I just thought that book, not only writings, can we have a QR code wherein when you scan it, you get that voice of that person for 1 minute?
Yes, of course. So you will have to just find a right platform to upload the content. Primarily YouTube, because that's the open source software where you don't have to pay any money. So you'll have to upload their audio. You will have to make a video, because audio upload is not an option in YouTube. So what it will ask you is put an image of somebody. So you can put an image of the person who's speaking, or an image of your deceased partner, or you could put both their images, or you could put the image of the book. Anything. And then upload the audio recording in the form of a video file. And that link can be turned into a QR code.
So I just thought maybe that will make it because they're all the tech savvy people. So this will be an experiential type of thing. So that why not we add that also? So I was thinking.
Sounds good.
So thank you so much, Ishita. It has been a very invigorating exchange of ideas and also inputs from the other participants as well as from the resource person, and your own summing up, which really gave us a broad idea as to how archiving is done and how it will have its repercussions and its outflow also. That was very nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your kind appreciation.